part of the reason that I moved to DC was, well, a big part of it was because of the music and the people there. Of course, I learned about it through the albums, the song, and the music. But as a photographer, I was really drawn to the visual aspects of what was going on in those records. And also, of course, there's the book Band in DC, which Bert has quite a lot of photos in there as well. Some of the, was it the first Fugazi EP? You've got that great shot on there. Is that with Ian's SG, which is kind of dripping with sweat? That shot in particular is one of my favorites. Many more, too many to talk about. And in fact, the interesting thing for me is that there's many shots that were my favorites or that were inspired me I didn't even know that you took, Bert. So I'm sure there's other ones as well. Like, segue questions, what are we talking about? So I guess my first question, it's to you, Bert, is just tell us a little bit about when you started taking pictures and why, and just a little bit of a backstory about that, where you started with that.
Okay. Well, I started in high school, taking just like a couple of classes. There was a place outside of DC in the suburbs called Glen Echo, which is an old amusement park, but they had some classes there, all sorts of arts classes. William Christenberry, a photographer, he was a teacher there for a bit. So I took classes there, the basic how to process film, how to print things. And I just wanted to just capture my surroundings. Also, at that point, I was starting to skateboard a lot. And we were being inspired by what we would see in the skateboard magazines, like Skateboarder, and then eventually and like Thrasher and these others later. But in particular, I would say like the photos of Glenn Friedman that he had taken back then when he was a kid, of the LA skaters, and just capturing that moment as well. The first pictures really that I took were of our little group of friends skateboarding. And yeah, I mean, that was the kind of the impetus, just to kind of capture that.
Yeah, interesting. It's interesting that you say that, about how taking that class. So within that class, I assume you had a dark room there and they taught you how to print and all of that. I mean, do you remember the first photograph that you ever developed, or that you put in the tray?
Yeah, it was just a picture in the hallway of our high school, Wilson High School in DC. And it was just a random group of students walking through there. It wasn't a particularly good print, but it was a print. It was the first thing. Somewhere I have it still. I haven't run across it lately, but I do remember. I don't have the negative for some reason, but the print is still somewhere around.
Yeah. I guess I'm more interested in what it felt like. What was that experience? Is that something that drew you into wanting to continue doing it?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's kind of the abstractness of it. Like, you just see a scene and you point a little machine at it, click a button, and then, in the not too distant future, you have that scene again. But it's never quite like you imagine it. It's always a little different. You see things that you didn't see before. And I just kind of found that fascinating. So yeah, that in particular worked well for like the skateboarding stuff, which I did like immediately after that, which is trying to capture something that's so fleeting and just kind of going by so quickly, like a skater in the pool doing tricks or whatever. It's just this quick little moment, and you manage to capture it, and that was just amazing for me.
Awesome. Okay, cool. So your friends, the skateboarders, who were they also these friends the musicians as well? Was this coinciding with music, or how did music come into play, with the photography and the skateboarding in your scene?
Hmm. Yeah, it was quite a few. I mean, like some of the first skaters that I knew were people in my neighborhood. So people like Ian Mackay and Henry Garfield at that point, a few others, John Hargadon, the Nee brothers, John Falls, even, who didn't live in the neighborhood but was a skater, and he would come along with the Nee brothers also. But yeah, and these were all people that were involved, not involved in the scene yet because there was no scene yet. But if you're skating, you always have music going on, and it's usually something relatively aggressive. And that kind of eventually led more into, the punk scene.
Mhm. Okay,
Mm.
cool. So you talked about, looking at different magazines like Thrasher and Skateboarder and Glenn Friedman's photographs.
Mhm.
When do you remember anything like that or something like that happening with music, like particular, you know, were there zines, record covers, or anything that was a similar type of thing?
Yeah, a bit here and there, because I mean there wasn't any
There's a
internet
lot.
back then,
Yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
you have to rely on whatever you came across. But just seeing pictures of these musicians that you'd heard on the radio or heard about. Um, I think of a particular image. I mean, Flipside fanzine, Plain Magazine, when it started out back then, they always had great stuff, and then as well, Maximum Rock and Roll. But the Slash magazine, those were all just like seeing what was going on, and so you get your knowledge of the music as well as being able to kind of see what it is. And
Yeah.
one thing afterwards that I remember is seeing a picture of the Misfits on one of their 7 inches, and you knew nothing about them. There was no real information. It was just, I don't know, this dark image of these 4 guys, one of them with a cane, and your mind just kind of, what's going on, and just kind of,
Yeah.
you're just fascinated. It's like, what is this?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess, yeah, I asked that because I remember, you know, us being from a certain generation, it's like
Mhm.
in order to, you couldn't really listen to on demand. You had to actually, play a record. You had to hear something on
Mhm.
the radio. And the radio, you wouldn't hear, the music that we liked or, on the radio. So, for me, I would look at records, or I would look at the artwork, and I would look at the photographs, and that's what really drew me in. And I guess I'm just
Mhm.
wondering, how, if you had that, because, being myself, I photographed a time of, DC punk music history or whatever, which was after yours, and you came
Mhm.
before me, one of the original.
Mhm.
There's the cool thing about the DC scene is you've got these chunks of time, different people photographing, different sections or different bands that were there, and it kept going on. And you've got, for me, I would refer to photographs that say you took, or Jim Saw, or Cynthia or John Falls, or people like that.
Mhm.
When you started out, obviously, you were one of the originators of that scene. So were there any music photographs, or what photography did you refer to for your inspiration? Say, photographing, the pictures that you took of the various musicians jumping and falling all over the place.
um, trying to, I mean, music photographers, I think at that point seem to be more anonymous, where you just see an image,
Yeah. Well,
and not always with the credit. So you just kind of look at the images. Um,
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, that's true. And it's that unfortunately it carries on now, right? And like
mhm,
I even said before, I was like, Bert took some of the most, memorable pictures in my head, but I actually didn't know he took it because I didn't, I
mhm.
didn't look hard enough. So, I mean, I guess if there's any in particular images that you remember, maybe we could figure out who took it. Maybe we couldn't. I don't know. I guess I'm just kind of interested in that, seeing, and maybe it wasn't even music. Maybe it was just the action, the intensity, trying to catch
Mhm.
that fleeting moment, like with the skateboarding photography. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think as far as music photography, for instance, at the time, like starting out, there weren't any music photographers that would influence that I was being influenced by. It was just kind of going out there and capture whatever was going on, just capture the image. I was more influenced outside of music by like your kind of more or less standard well-known photographers, your Robert Frank, it was like Roy DeCarava, even,
Yeah.
and yeah, Diane Arbus, agree, and like just a number of people of that generation, like
Yeah.
the early black and white generation. Um, and for me, said for the music stuff, it was just more influenced by the actions, like what was going on stage.
That's a good point. It's yeah, especially when you're first starting, one I would hope, photographers they learn about, or we learn about these different photographers, especially, people like Robert Frank, and Diane
Yeah.
Arbus, and composition and all of that. And then, in my case, it was about trying to capture the action, but it was more than that. It was like, can you capture the action in this composed way that makes sense,
Mhm.
which I can see in a lot of your photos, especially, looking through the book here. It's the way that you've got the angles and the way that the pictures kind of speak to each other. I think
Mhm.
it's quite evident. So it's interesting to hear. Yeah. Um, what else? Okay, so
Yeah.
let's see. When it came, I guess you kind of went over this, but I'm just interested. Was there any particular reason for documenting the DC punk scene, or at the time, did you realize what were you aware of what you were doing, or was it just like, I'm taking pictures,
Mhm.
these are my friends and I get to develop them,
Mhm. Um, yeah, no, I wasn't really thinking much in the future, I guess, not purposely anyway. Um, I mean, I didn't start really taking like consistently taking band photos until probably 84, 85. Because before that, it was just I was playing in bands. I was playing in bands at that point as well, but it was more kind of caught up in the experience of the music scene. And I would take a few pictures here and there, um, but nothing, just sort of to capture that moment. Like there's a Black Market Baby photo in the book that I think I took like one roll of film or even half a roll of film at Madam's Organ back then in like 1980. Um, it was more like kind of just sort of living it. So it wasn't like until later when, after seeing a band like Rites of Spring perform live, um, I just kind of went, all right, well, I really want to capture this. These are my friends. These are people I've known for a few years, and they're amazing. And I want to just be able to, you know, get an image, maybe to show somebody down the line or show them or to them. But outside of that, I was never thought anything more like really kind of documenting the scene.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's interesting. So it's almost as if, would you consider, maybe Right to Spring, or seeing some of those early gigs, and the emotion and the energy of that band in particular, that just felt like, this is so incredible, I have to photograph this.
Hmm.
Is that
Yeah.
were they one of the
Yeah.
first ones so would you consider that the starting point where you're like, okay, I'm going to continue now and I'm actually photographing bands?
Yeah, I would say definitely. Like, I mean, even when I've looked back through my negatives, the band stuff doesn't really kick in until, and mainly I would say like 1985, because there was
Yeah.
just like such an emotion bubbling up in the, in the city then, and then, just kind of to be a part of that, and to just kind of, if anything, captured for my own memories.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, cool. No, it's great.
Mhm.
It's it's interesting with with the Washington DC scene in particular, music, different music scenes. That one in particular, I think there's all these points, where different things happen, and that one was a very key one in the beginning. We're talking about the Revolution Summer, as it was called.
Mhm.
You could tell you were there. You could tell us more about that, but you know, experiencing that and then wanting to photograph it. And I think it's great that you did it. Jumping off from that, I'd like to, I want to bring up this image that you sent to me, and I've seen before, I've seen many times, and I always thought it was a great, amazing shot for more reasons than one, more than just
Mhm.
of who it is, but what it is and how it happened. So let me bring that up and then you can introduce it and we can start to talk about that and kind of dig into that. And I think that's a good starting point for,
Mhm.
this conversation. So, and the suspense is killing all of us. I will probably edit that suspense out, but we can leave that in. All right, so here it is. Dun, dun, dun. What image do you think it will be, everybody? It's this one. Let's make that big. There we go. That okay? We can see
Mhm.
this.
Yep.
Okay, so why don't you tell us, just tell us who this is, where it's taken,
Mhm.
and anything you want to say about it. I've got a lot of things I'd love to say. I want to say about it. I want to ask you about it, but I don't want to. I'm gonna hear what you have to say first. So go ahead.
Okay. I mean, yeah, this is Rites of Spring, um, in the springtime, 1985. The show that Food for Thought, which was a restaurant in DC that was owned by Dante Ferrando's dad, Dante, who was in Grey Matter and Iron Cross and other bands. His dad had this restaurant, and on weekends they would have matinee shows around this time, and those were always like amazing shows. Um, this image I always really liked just because there's so much different going on. I mean, yeah, Eddie, Janney in the background there. It's kind of concentrating on what he's doing. Mike Fellows as well, and singing. Guy, as always, flying somewhere. And then Chris Bald, like reaching out to him, maybe trying to catch him. Um, what I really loved about this image was Chris's arm also just evening out there, like reflecting the Alvin Ailey dance poster, um, which, like I said before, you see, I mean, I was just kind of focusing on there's Guy flying through the air. It looks crazy. And then afterwards you see, maybe it was subliminal, maybe not, does, this other thing that kind of makes it even stronger. And, the crowd of people, half of which I probably know in the crowd. Yeah, so this is definitely one of my favorite ones.
It is. So yeah, it's interesting you say the dance poster. That is, what is that poster for? Up in the left, we see it's like a ballet, or what is that for, that
Yeah,
poster?
Alvin Ailey was the Alvin Ailey group was a modern dance troupe in DC, I think they were.
Okay.
So it was just a poster for that. And yeah, Food for Thought had these various posters, all kind of some kind of art, theater, music, dance, yeah, all along the walls there.
Yeah. That's one of the things that I was drawn to. I mean, obviously I'm drawn to the fact that, Guy is flying through the air. Guy, who later, helped, was in Fugazi, of course, if you're unaware of that, them or him, definitely check it out, look it up. And that reflection, that poster mirroring the scene is just incredible. I think it's, looking at the legs, it's more than just, Chris Bald with his hand up there, but you've got Guy's leg, the whole thing is just, it just works, and it's, yeah, something you can't plan.
Yeah.
It happened to me in one of my photos as well. That's why I'm glad you chose this photo, because it was a picture I did of Nation of Ulysses. They're performing in their sitting room, or their front room at the embassy, and there's a painting of the wall of like some kind of dancer jumping, and Ian is doing the same thing. But anyways, but yeah, that I think is amazing. And then, like you said, we've got this, all these different people in here. But I mean, before you even get to that, so you mentioned, being influenced by people like Robert Frank and the early photographers. And, for me, I can really see, Robert Frank, for example, he's got, kind of shooting from the hip, just kind of aiming his camera, and somehow the composition just works, doesn't it? With Guy being perfectly framed, beautiful frames within all of this. At this time, so food for thought. So if you, as you said, it's, a restaurant, many people haven't been there, but people who have been there, I went there many years later. But so you've got here the stage, and then did you still have on the left, like the little booths down here? Was the layout, did it stay the same over the years, the food for thought layout? Because it's
no, there's another photo in the book as well, as that I took from, they had a little kind of balcony area there as well. And took a photo of gray matter playing. And that was a photo that I just wanted to take to just get an idea of what food for thought looks like. Yeah. And it was, you see, it's like a little image of Mark, the guitar player for Gray Matter, and then the sea of people that leads all the way back to the entrance. Like no booths, I think any tables that they had were moved away.
Yeah, that's great. So okay, so let's talk about like some of the people in the photos. One person that stands out to me, maybe I could be wrong, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm right, but this person over here with the hat and the glasses, would that happen to be Doug?
It is Doug Berzel.
Doug Berzel. So tell us a little bit about Doug Berzel at this time, what he was doing, or what you knew. Had you photographed him as well in groups or play with him?
I'm trying to, I forget the timeline sometime, but I mean, Doug was the bass player extraordinaire, and he played in the band Beefeater with Tomas Squip and Fred. And yeah, it's usually when you look out into the crowd, like at a particular time, like half the people would be in all the other bands that were still kind of going on. So it was a very kind of supportive scene in that way.
Yeah. So how many people in this shot do you know that were in bands, or just, had done something? Because, I recognize Doug, I was the glasses and everything.
Right.
I didn't know Chris Bald. I think he was just after my time there.
Yeah.
Who else do we have? Do we have anyone else?
Right behind Chris Bald is Natalie Avery.
Okay.
And just kind of see her, and she played guitar in Fire Party. Just behind her, you just see like kind of half his face and arm is this guy Dave McDuff, who was not in any bands, but he was a DJ, maybe even like a program director at WMUC Radio, and he hosted radio shows there, which I think Marginal Man played there, the Brief Weeds played there, and quite a few other bands played on the air there. Over to the right, under Guy, over closer to Mike Fellows there, guy kind of looking down away. Yep. That is Lawrence McDonald, who was later in a band called Bells of. I knew Lawrence through Tom Clinton, the guitar player from Youth Brigade, because they were all Bethesda skaters. So yeah, here he is. I mean, he might have been starting Bells of around this point or soon after, I think. Some of the other people, yeah, kind of hard to tell from the backs of
it's
heads.
hard to tell. I mean, one thing that's great about this, another thing I really love about this crowd shot in particular is this, it gives a good, there's a lot of different people in this shot, a lot of different types of people, when we think of early, many or even shots after this, like punk rock, hardcore crowd shots, photos, usually, you see, what do you see? Like lots of white dudes going,
Yeah.
And you have a little of that in here, but not really. We've got, people from all walks of life, which is, I think, is what also makes this shot quite special, quite interesting. Really good representation. We're photographers, right? Someone's going to ask us like, this is about full frame. Okay, I don't know who Doug Brazell is. Well, you got to check it out, figure out who Doug Brazell. Beefeater, very influential on Fugazi, I would say, in more ways than one. Check. So technical wise, like, I'm guessing, what did you have? What camera? Do you remember the camera you used to shoot this?
Oh yeah, I think just about everything that I shot was on a Nikon FE2, which was a great camera. It was it was not a fully manual camera, but somehow it felt really good. It was inexpensive, and I could get cheap lenses for it too.
Yeah.
So just about everything I shot for years and years was on that FE2. It was the first 35 millimeter camera I ever bought. And yeah, it was a great workhorse until it got stolen out of my car one day.
Oh.
And then replaced by another FE2.
Well, that's good. You still have an FE2?
Yeah, I have an FE2 and an FM2 as well, and a slew of other ones. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, I love the Nikon, or as they say over in England, English viewers don't take offense to this, Nikon, which I cannot get my head around. Anyways, FE2. I don't know if you knew this, but I worked at Falls Camera out in Arlington for a long time, and that was the beginning of my downfall of love of cameras and obsession with Nikons. I don't have an FE2, but I'm sure if I had the opportunity for one, I would take it. I think it's a cool camera. It looks to be, what is this? Oh, go ahead, Bert.
I was going to say, it's funny you mentioned that, because I bought the FE2 at Falls Camera. In fact, just about everything that I bought for the longest time was from Falls Camera in Virginia there. And there were like two people there who I was just talked to. One was Jimmy Corson, who later, who had also had book shows early on and had run his own little indie shop in Arlington. And Annie Ajanovich. Between the two of them, they always kind of steered me right in what to buy. So everything came from them. They'd let me know when things were on sale. Yeah. But yeah, the FE2 and the Series E lenses that I was using.
No, it's funny that you say that, because when you said the Nikon FE2, I thought of Falls, because I worked there for many years. This is post Jimmy and Annie, but I don't know. I guess it was just that people at that shop had a thing for Nikon, So when I started there, I was shooting Pentax. I left there shooting Nikon. In the back, the owner, Mr. Falls, who no relation, I don't think, to John
Mhm.
Falls, as far as I know.
No.
But he had a case with his black camera collection, and it was every amazing camera you could think of that was black that had never been touched. Beautiful, but quite frustrating for us photographers who just want to try one. Um,
Right.
that's great. So Annie and Jimmy, they work there, and you would go
Mhm.
there. Yeah, Jimmy's actually a great photographer. Annie as well. I'm
Mhm.
not sure what she's doing now. I know Jimmy's in Japan, I believe, and doing some really interesting stuff. Yeah, I bought a Rolleiflex from Jimmy. Anyways, and I sold many people cameras from the scene when I was there. Very strange. Okay, so um, Flash. Did you obviously use Flash on the picture?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. That was my, yeah, my go-to. It kind of,
Hmm.
I mean, because most of these places you'd be shooting are just really dark. And, you know, I was not that well versed on super fast films, but there weren't really that many super fast films back then either. So
Yeah,
the
yeah.
flash worked best.
Yeah, and it's
Mhm.
yeah, we're people nowadays are spoiled. They're like, I'm gonna shoot with my digital camera at ISO 6400, no
Mhm.
flash, and if the lights aren't perfect, I'm really angry. Here we have, no stage lights, the
Mhm.
back of a restaurant, slightly dark, you've got no choice. But it's good that you did use flash, because look at this,
Mhm.
what we can see here.
Oh yeah.
It truly, I love that wood paneling.
Mhm.
I love that. It's amazing. Wood paneling and the cable coming from the guitar, it's
Mhm.
real. It's plugged in. It's not unplugged. This was happening. Um, so we've got flash FE2, the Series E lenses, which of course were Nikon glass, but they were apparently they weren't the pro line, but we all
Mhm.
knew that it was absolutely fine. So if you're looking for a good lens still, if you see
Mhm.
a Series E, nothing wrong with the Series E. Probably was this
Mhm.
like a 50 millimeter lens, maybe, or like a
um
28 or something?
28.
Yeah.
I shot mostly with
Mm.
28.
Yeah.
Every now and then with the 50, depending on how far
Mm.
back I thought I would be. I mean, I would occasionally, if I was going to shoot, definitely knew I was going to shoot at a show, I would bring, have like the 50 in my pocket somewhere.
Yeah,
But,
for sure.
yeah, and do the quick change on stage or in the back or wherever.
Yeah, yeah, that was a
Mhm.
moment. Yeah, no zooming. You had to actually physically change it, and then hopefully not forget the lens on the stage and leave, which I think I've done a couple times. Um, so another thing about this shot, many things, it's in color. Tell us
Mhm.
about that. Was a lot of your work in color? Was,
Mhm.
you know, why in color for this shot?
Um, I don't remember. It might have been just the only film I had at the time because I usually shot with Tri-X, and then later on, eventually, as they started kind of fading out Tri-X a bit with T-Max, but I would occasionally get rolls for cheap or on sale somewhere, or just happen to have a couple of rolls here and there. So there are a few that I've shot in color, but I always printed them in black and white because I could never print in color.
Okay, cool. So this shot, when's the first time you saw it? Well, obviously you probably got a little print, but did you scan this
Mhm.
recently into color, or when did that
Oh, I
come
mean,
about?
when I was over the years been in the process of scanning my negatives, um, the color ones I would scan in both color and black and white. Um, then eventually, like the actual images, I would initially just scan in color if I was going to put them out into the world somewhere, and then yeah, just I don't know. I
Yeah,
mean, yeah, they were rarely printed. To say
yeah,
like
yeah.
until really more the until I could really scan things in, and then thought, yeah, why not?
Yeah, no, it's cool to see it in color. And I guess I mentioned that, most people who aren't familiar with, Bert's early work, or, photographs from this time, they're usually all, it's rare to see a color image. I think at the time we were all, as you say, shoot in black and white, process it at home. You had a lot of control
Mhm,
over it. And it also was kind of like a nod to past photographers, so
mhm.
so yeah, in that way, nowadays, like, okay, color, yeah, why are you guys getting so hyped up about color? Well, that's why. So you can really get a sense of the fashion, a little bit of sense of the fashion, the clothes and the hair and everything, which is great.
Mhm.
Let's, I guess let's, while we're looking at, let's pull it back. Let's talk a little bit more about, so this is 1985, right?
Mhm.
So would this be Revolution Summer as it's happening, right before, when, how does this image fall into Revolution Summer? And maybe just give us a little bit of a intro, or a little bit of a understanding of what Revolution Summer was, if you can, in a few sentences. It might be too hard to, but just for people who don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost a little bit like talking about straight edge.
Yeah, yeah.
That's when I was like, well, this happened. Um, but it was, I mean, somewhat something was changing in the music scene at that point. And, from like the earlier days of punk rock in DC, which were definitely like more exclusive and more punk new wave, if you will. It got definitely more aggressive as time was going on, and more people were kind of feeding into it, and we started getting a bit out of control. And I think the people involved in Revolution Summer were, I mean, it's one of the bands most linked to it would be Rites of Spring, which kind of brought a more, you know, and maybe less, more inward looking sense. I mean, it was still, you can look at this and go, there's still a lot of action and insanity going on there, but it was, less about lashing out and more about introspection and, you know, connecting to your own selves. And then, you know, I guess, yeah, just putting that, you go to a show and there's like not the violence there was, because people are more aware of themselves, the people around them. Um, it's like maybe somewhere around this time was when Mark Anderson started to come, uh, was around early on, and he had done a lot of stuff with this. Well, did this group called Positive Force, which was very well named because they did a lot of really good things, a lot of benefit shows, um, benefit other groups in DC, like made people more aware politically of what was going on outside of our own little circle. So I don't know, all these kind of things mixing in together, just kind of became, like a Revolution Summer, like a change of the status quo, and just kind of blossomed on from there.
Yeah, it's so Mark Anderson, you mentioned, just so people
Mhm.
don't know, he was one of the people behind a group called Positive Force, which is still
Mhm.
very active today as well. There's a whole another documentary on them that, if people are interested, check that out. And yeah, you saying, talking about how early, hardcore, being quite aggressive, and then we have this photo, Rites of Spring, the emotion that they're expressing, and then also was pointed out, we talked about the crowd here. It is crazy. There's a lot of energy, but it doesn't feel um, aggressive in that way. So I can
Mhm.
see how that would work. And also, um, there's a very known photo that I believe you took the photo on the roof, didn't you, of gray matter? Was that you, the
Mhm.
Revolution photo with the, yeah,
Right.
that you took that, didn't you? Just to make sure. Yeah,
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 yeah.
okay, yeah.
Yeah, it was the
That's,
last Gray Matter show.
yeah,
I think it
yeah,
was.
okay.
Yeah.
So was that, before this image in date wise, time wise?
No, it would have been afterwards.
Afterwards. So this
Yeah.
is happening, and then it was kind of officially stamped in the history, I guess I would say, kind of through that photograph. So I'm flipping through a copy of Band in DC, which was for me early on was a book. It's got so many photos and so much information that
Oh yeah.
it's spend a lot of time to it and always return to it. I'm just trying to see if I can find that photo quickly. But anyways, check that out. But there's a great shot that Bert took of Grey Matter performing on the roof of this restaurant here in Washington, D.C., which of course was an ode to the Beatles, I would guess, from
from Let It Be.
From Let It Be, yeah, which I've seen, which if you haven't seen, check that out as well. Anyway, so they painted Revolution Somewhere and they dated it 1985 on there, and Bert took the photos, and it all kind of comes together. And this this happening down below in the restaurant, a few months earlier, I can see how it all relates. And I think it's all, it sums it up in a pretty cool way, I think. Or it can't, you can't really sum it up, as you said, but it's definitive, it's cool.
Definitely.
So with that in mind, there's lots written about revolution. I think Mark Anderson in his book, he goes into it in detail. I'm pretty sure he probably does, doesn't he?
Right.
But yeah, Mark Anderson showed up at the time, and he's in the book. His book here is Band in DC. There's a lot of Bert's photos in here as well. Really small, some really small versions, which I'm trying to get in close to Cynthia. You got to make out like a huge version of this book, and she did with the slideshow, of course. But anyways, that's awesome. Oh wait, look at this. So this just flipped over. I wanted to ask you about this as well, because this is quite okay. So you've got this photo here, and then we have this, right?
Right.
Cynthia, apparently, according to the credit, took this photo.
You
remember, she must have been standing next to you, was she? Or are you guys right next to each other?
Very possibly.
Yeah.
I mean, usually when I would shoot at shows, for the most part, but depending on how big the stage was, I would be kind of crouched away somewhere, like trying to not be in anybody else's way, but still be able to get the band. So I would be mostly focused on that. And it's happened a couple of times where I've seen pictures that are very similar to what I've taken, just from a slightly different angle.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I find that really cool too. Just to kind of see what is going on around me.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, while I was there, I didn't really know unless it was in that frame. Whatever was going on in the frame, I was aware of. But for the most part, around me, when I was shooting, not quite as much.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, at these early shows, these shows in the 80s, were there a lot of other photographers taking pictures that you remember or were aware of?
Not loads, but there definitely were. I mean, Cynthia was taking pictures. Tiffany Pruitt was taking pictures. Ellie Moran, Leslie Clegg, and it's interesting because obviously Jim Saw, but it's mostly women taking pictures. Which, I think they're sort of the unacknowledged, unacknowledged documenters as well.
Yeah, I guess it is unfortunate in a lot of, it's something that we all address when it comes to arts, and a lot of things that need to be addressed. But I think within the DC scene, at least for me, I don't know if I made myself. Yeah, I'm aware of it. Obviously, if you go to there's some pictures you took actually of Cynthia and the people who
Cynthia
did this book.
Les.
Yeah, which is cool. And I remember looking at this book. There's a great shot that you've taken the back there as well. But the last page, you got the photographers of the scene. You're in there, Bert, and then there's mostly women. Tomas, but it's interesting. I guess what I was going forward was, nowadays if you go to a gig,
Mhm.
most gigs, you've got the photographers, they're in like a little gated area,
Mhm.
takes, they're all, there's like 100 of them fighting, and then they leave, the scene.
Mhm.
um when I first started going to gigs, I would, be myself and maybe a couple other people. And if there was
Mhm.
more than two or three photographers, I would actually not, I would get embarrassed because I didn't want to ruin the show by like taking pictures and going crazy. I don't know if you had that same experience, or if you were aware
Mhm.
of if things ever got to, where it was too much about pictures being taken and less about the performance.
Yeah, I mean, it would get to that point occasionally. Um, like it got later on, like for instance, Fugazi and like that time frame in the '90s, late '80s, early '90s. As more and more people started taking photographs, then it didn't quite feel like you know as special. Like you said, it's like everybody's out there taking pictures, then it makes it much harder to enjoy the show. And said, I mean, when I was doing this, maybe there'd be a couple of other people around somewhere taking photos.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, the one thing that I was aware of, I would always try not to block somebody's view, or as little as possible. I never wanted to be one of those guys who's standing up in front of the band, like getting up really close, taking their picture. And meanwhile, everybody's like, who are you? What are you
Yeah.
doing?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
want to see the band, not you.
I agree. I think that's yeah, I can get that feeling from looking at your photographs. That's how I felt, and other people, within the scene. And that's, you're gonna get a s- a better sense of what's happening as well, if you're letting things happening, in front of you.
Mm.
But it's funny with the Cynthia photograph from the same angle. I just had noted because I was looking through. I was like, oh man, similar. But I think I'm on hers. I was probably in black and white as well. But anyways, I mean that same thing has happened with photographs that I've taken later on. When I moved to DC, I would see different angles, and it's quite interesting how you can piece it together. Um, Nowadays it's not as special because, as everyone's got phones, so you can like geo tag it and see all of that. But back then,
Mhm.
when not that many people are taking pictures, to get a different angle,
Mhm.
someone had to take that picture, someone had to take it home, process it, print it, and all of that. And it was harder too. It wasn't as easy to get these
Mhm.
type of shots, as well. um
Yeah, the one thing I was curious is I mean, I don't remember ever seeing somebody else's photo that I'm in. Like I've got a few photos where Jim Saw is in there. Um, and maybe like one or other photographer at the time. But I always wondered if anybody had ever taken a picture that I'm in.
it's
See
interesting.
if my
Yeah.
technique was actually like, was I actually hiding, you know, in a corner somewhere?
Well, I think you probably were, because if you're not
Yeah.
in there, well, either that, or you had the best angle, and someone was, people taking it were also trying to get in on that angle as well. But I did a similar thing. I try to stay down low and hide, and you know occasionally I'll find old YouTube, or I'll be sent old YouTube clips, and there I will be in there. I'm like, oh no, there I am. The worst one was Ian MacKay. He's like, there's footage being shot of Fugazi, at the Washington Monument, and Jem Cohen was filming. Ian's like, Pat, you're in this shot perfectly framed. It's crazy. I was like, what? What are you talking about? And it's like some shot of Ian doing feedback on his amp, and like circled is me in the background going in slow motion. It's like the worst. But anyways, I was trying to
Maybe
be
I
a
should.
ninja. Not as good. And also I had bleach blonde hair, so that did not help the situation. Um, but anyways, yeah, I think it is a skill to be in there and not be seen, and to capture it. I think it's respect for the musicians and the scene and the audience as well. I think that's
Mm.
quite, I completely agree with that. The last thing I wanted to talk about, or have you talk about, ask you about, is Guy in this photograph. And Guy as a subject to be photographed. I noticed that you've got, well, this incredible photo of Guy here in Rites of Spring. The final photograph in the book band in DC is this amazing shot of Guy, you know, from One Last, where was it? One Last Wish or Happy Go
Yeah.
Lucky? One Last
Yeah,
Wish.
it was One Last Wish at that
Yeah.
point.
So
Yeah.
One Last Wish, and there was a few other bands that Guy was in, and of course Guy's in Fugazi, and incredible photos that you've taken of Guy in Fugazi. So maybe talk about a little bit about photographing Guy, that experience, and why Guy, why so many pictures of Guy.
I mean, I guess, you know, you could say he's sort of a muse in a way. Just his, you know, you put a guitar or a microphone into his hand and it's kind of like magic happens. You know, there's like, you know, great songwriter, great singer, great performer, really. And he's always just like, it just seems like he's on the verge of exploding somewhere. Just, you know, you can see how that's like somebody just shot him out of a cannon. You know, he's just like launching himself here to there. You know, half the photos I have of Guy's either, you know, a couple of feet off the ground, few feet off the ground, or just kind of splattered out on the ground. And, you know, there's always something happening with him. So it's kind of hard not to, you know, kind of focus on that. It's just kind of the action just kind of sucks you right into there. And, you know, he's like such a main focus. You know, I find it almost hard to take a bad picture of him.
Yeah, I guess for me, a bad picture of Guy would be the picture that the picture you didn't take, and he did something incredible and you weren't fast enough. I don't know if there's any experiences that you had, any moments with Guy that you can see this picture in your head, but somehow you missed it or it didn't come out, the flash didn't go off. Is there anything like that with him in particular?
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of things that I've missed, you know, out of just either horribly out of focus or, you know, completely blurred because I'm just trying to get the camera up to catch something. But it didn't really seem to matter much because there was always going to be another moment where something was going to go on. And that's not, you know, just with, I mean, in Rites of Spring, you know, Mike Fellows was always kind of doing something interesting as well, or Eddie also. And just kind of that era of bands, there was somebody exploding on stage.
Yeah.
But yeah, Guy seemed to be the main focus. You know, like I said, it's really is hard to take a really bad picture.
Yeah, it's true. I think that's also, you know, for people who haven't heard Rites of Spring or any of these bands, looking at these photographs, I would hope that it would maybe make one want to hear it, you know, to check it out.